Yeah, and even our baseline, like before we start grazing, it was very interesting to see the difference between the eco regimes, like what we have when it comes to soil organic carbon, for example. Michigan looks like we store mostly on the top layers of the soil, and then when you got the Wyoming results, most of their soil organic carbon stocks is going to be on the deeper. So like it's kind of like just the baseline already inform us, and so much that I think was lacking on the literature.
Welcome to the Beef Podcast. I'm Travis Mullenix, and today I have a guest from Michigan State. Joe, I'm not going to get your name right. I know that. When we talked about that, your first name is one of the hardest Brazilian names for me to say. So we'll just call you Joe or JP, as you said earlier. But Joao Sacramento is at Michigan State University. You're a research associate in the Department of Animal Sciences. And then you're focused on this landscape intelligence network, which is a research focused on grazing management, methane emissions, and use of technology such as drones, etc. So we'll get into that in a little bit, but excited to have you on the show and learn about this landscape intelligence network. It sounds pretty important. So for the audience, I know I gave you a brief background, but I know you're from Brazil, but you're here in the United States working at Michigan State. Kind of give the audience your background of how you got where you are today.
Yes, thank you so much for the introduction, Travis. Yes, I graduated in Brazil back in 2014 in animal science, and then I decided to do my master's in bioengineering, working with methane emissions on dairy systems, and then I keep on my PhD in bioengineering as well, work with requirement of energy for dairy cattle and methane emissions. Halfway through my PhD, my advisor back in Brazil highly advised me to get out of the country and increasing some skills that I was missing, including English. And then I applied for scholarships in the United States. And I came to finish my PhD at the University of New Hampshire, where I stayed for 2 years and a half as a visiting scholar. And then after that period there, still working with methane emissions on dairy systems, I work with grazing systems for dairy back then. And then I was kind of burned out of the dairy a little bit. And this opportunity at Michigan State to work with Dr. Jason Roundtree appears to keep doing methane emissions, but on the beef side, work with grazing animals. So since I had the background on grazing for dairy and methane, was a good fit for me, and I came to Michigan State, where I'm at the Department of Animal Science and also working with, as you said before, the Landscape Intelligence Network.
So tell us, what is the Landscape Intelligence Network? I mean, it seems more like some high, technology focused, system.
Yeah, it's not really. So, like, it's the name of our center. So, Jason Roundtree launched a Center for Regenerative Agriculture back in 2022, if I'm not wrong. But then, after a few years and all this heated discussion and buzz on what is regenerative agriculture, we feel that we want the center to not be exclusive. Like, we want to all kind of productions and all kind of producers come to us. So we rebrand our center, and then we change for the Landscape Intelligence Network. What that is, it's a group of scientists, managers, farmers, supply chain manager decisions, and policymakers that we all get together with the idea of solving problems like landscape degradation and food supply and food security. So the whole idea of the center is bringing a team that's going to create tools that's going to help the producers and also the supply chain looking at the system as a whole. We are mainly focused now on grazing beef systems. However, since the center is brand new, the idea is to expand not just for grazing systems, but also feedlot systems, and not just beef as well. We want to be helping dairy systems, crop, foresters. So like we have a team of research that's growing as the months pass by. We have three main kind of pillars on the center. The first one is this workforce where we all work together towards the same purpose. And the second one is disengagement. It is important for us to be engaged with producers and farmers because the tools that we are trying and we're developing, it has to be useful and simple for them. And then the resilience. Resilience is a big piece. Like we focus on the system as a whole, so we can make the system more resilient. And the resilience means a lot of things, but for us, it's more like, can you keep producing what you produce in a good year, in a drought year, or if you have a flood? So the idea is to create a health system that's going to be more resilient for the producers. So that's overall brief explanation on what the landscape intelligence network is. We have three main tools that we are developing, and I can talk about them a little later. Yeah. So the three main tools. So we have three tools that we are working on, and we have two projects that's happening on the field. So the first two, we call them range, and it stands for Range Assessment Net Greenhouse Gas Emissions. And the idea of that tool is to measure report and verify emissions at the range level. We understand that there is tools that already, it's a model, it's going to be a model, and we understand that there is models out there that already does that job, like they do the job of predicting emissions. However, when you go to a smaller scale, they usually over predict or under predict. So our idea is to help the small scale. It's to go to the small scale and see, including some animal performance data, like some more robust data, how the emissions are going to look like in a producer farm, that it's going to be applicable for that producer, especially on the tracking of the emissions. So that's the first tool, and that's the tool that we have more working going on. The second two tools are still in process, but the second tool we call the Landscape Health Index. And the Landscape Health Index is also going to be a model that's going to incorporate some of the range products. And the idea is to have scientifically tell the producers how healthy the system is. So that tool is more complex. It's going to need more. It's a broader team working on. But that's the idea. It's to give them information so they can make better decisions based on how healthy the systems looks like at that point. And the last two that it's also a model, so those three models, we are calling like a predict risk model. And that's more focused on the supply chain and the policymakers, because the idea is if you want to make a shift on your production, what's the risks or the benefits of that shift? So like the idea that we're going to develop is how can we create a model that's going to better support decision making for the good or for the bad, if based on your management decisions. So like those are the three main tools that the center is working on, and we do have two projects happening that I'm always happy to talk about them. Those are on the ground happening right now.
So I really appreciate this concept that every decision has a downstream effect. And so many people do not take that account of making decisions on the ground and not realizing it has several year downstream effect of their performance, of their herds, of their productivity, profitability, etc. And so having that in the model is so important, but also looking at everything from a system.
Yeah. One thing that we are trying to shift, Travis, is the idea of not just focusing on one metric. So the whole center is working to focusing all the metrics and look at the system as a whole. I think I'm going to repeat that a lot, and it's challenging, it's complex, but that's how we believe that we should be looking at a system. So we have a lot of talk about soil carbon, for example. And soil carbon really is very important. But so we are trying to shift this idea of just looking in one metric and looking at more metrics to help decision making.
No, that's great, because livestock producers don't live in the world of nutrition or reproduction or forage management. They live in the world of system. And so having those metrics based around the system really helps them be better producers and make better decisions.
Absolutely.
Help your calves with digestive health and boost performance. By enhancing feed intake and supporting gut health, Digesterone Prime boosts your beef calves' immunity and growth while increasing profitability. Plus, it has no withdrawal periods, making it a smart choice for your feeding program. Learn more at dsm-firmenich.com/prime.
So yeah, if you want to talk about some key projects that you guys have going on, that'd be great.
Yeah, so we have two main projects, and most of the data that we're collecting for those projects are going to be feeding the models that I just talked about. So the main project that we have in our team, we call 3M, which stands for Metrics Management and Monitoring. It's a big project that's funded by FFAR, Noble, and some other collaborations. It's on grazing management. So the idea is how the grazing management can affect the system health. But that one, we focus a little more on emissions and soil health. So we have 12 modules. Like before I talk about the models, just as a scale of how big is the project, involve 5 states in the United States. So we are in Michigan, Oklahoma, Texas, Colorado, and Wyoming. We have 60 producers, so they are private farms that we collect data from them. So we don't give them any tips on the grazing. We don't tell them what to do. We just monitor their farms. And we have 3 research hubs. One is located here in Michigan at Lake City, is the one that I'm leading. We have 2 hubs down in Oklahoma at Noble Research Institute, one with native grasses and one introduced pasture. And we have one in Wyoming at University of Wyoming, Laramie. So at the research hubs, we do apply treatments. We have what we called a prescriptive grazing, which goes from a continuous grazing to a rest rotational kind of schedule. And we try to apply what we call adaptive grazing, which goes back to it's what nature is telling us what to do. So we don't set stone. The only things that we do, we try to give those pastures that we are adaptively grazing a longer period of recovery or rest. Depending on how you call it, where you are. So at the hubs, we apply treatments. At the producers, we don't. We have over 60 researchers involved on this project. It's a lot to manage. And we have 12 modules. So it's 12 teams working on different things. And to be fair to all of them, I'm going to not cite any names because we are a lot of us. The first module is a grazing module. So what the grazing module does is collecting information from the producers, and again, not telling them what to do, so we can create this gradient between a more conventional system, a more adaptive system, and how does that change the outcomes of their production. And then we have an ecosystem flux system, CO2 towers on the farms. Half of our producers have the flux tower, and now the research pastures also have. So we are tracking constantly every 3 seconds, if I'm not wrong, the flux of carbon in the system. We have a soil team that's mostly based at CSU in Colorado, and we collect a lot of soil samples. And the idea, we had a baseline on year 1, and we're going to recollect it on year 5. So the idea is to see what's happening when it comes to soil carbon based on the management. There's a lot to discuss on that, right? We have a water flux dynamics team that's measuring moisture and water hold capacity, runoff. We have a plant community team that's based on EOV, which stands for Ecological Outcome Verification, and they give a score to the farms that's mostly seeing how the grazings affect your biodiversity. And it's a snapshot for that. We have a remote sensing team that I'm very attached to that because of the second project that I'm going to talk later about, the drones, where we're trying to develop tools that can kind of near real time tell producers how to manage, where to move, where to go with the animals. So the remote sensing team, we work a lot with satellites, and then I do some personal work with drones just to get high resolution information. And then we move more for a social economics. So we have 2 teams. One, social well-being, where they collect a lot of information at the farm, trying to understand what's the decisions, why you graze the way you graze, what's the social decisions like, and then if you graze that way, are you be collecting the outcomes that you expect socially? So we have a whole team of scientists like work on the social science for the producers. We have an econ team that collect economic information, and that's like a challenge, of course, but we are trying to see if those farms, based on the decision that they make, are profitable. At the end of the day, that's important to all of us. We have a team that's the data scaffolding. Of course, we're collecting a lot of information, so we need to have a place to put all that information together, which is going to be available publicly. Right now, the researchers have access to that, and the producers can see the data from their own farm, which I think is super cool. So we go there, we collect the data, we feed the system, and the producers has access to that. And the last three modules are most focusing on modeling. We have a whole team of modelers working on soil because, of course, collecting soil data, it's extremely challenging, expensive. So scaling up that modeling is probably our best way to get there. Because that's another thing about us. We want to scale up. We don't want it to be just at a small scale. So modeling, it's probably the best tool that we have moving forward. We have a hydrologic model that's also work on the water piece, but to create those models, the same idea as the soil. And then the final one, it's a lot of models. The final one, it's the one that the one that the researchers are most excited about. It is this tool that we are trying to develop, but this tool is producer driven. Like we have meetings with the producers every year on all the locations, and then we try to create something that's actually going to be useful for them. So they have a lot of input on this tool that we are trying to develop, and mostly the tool is to help them how to better graze based on their own environment, because each farm is different. Like the way that I graze here, if my neighbor grazes, is not going to be the same. So the idea is to, with data, trying to inform them as best as we can. So this is our 3M project, and it's a lot, but I hope it was clear.
Yeah, I mean, that's tremendous. And I appreciate the diversity because, beef production across the United States is so diverse. And so what works in Michigan will not work in Wyoming or Oregon or wherever because of rainfall differences, forage production differences,
Absolutely,
species differences, right? And so, it's like when I was in University of Tennessee, it's going from couch potato cows that didn't have to move much every day to graze to the arid climates that cows are walking 15 to 20 miles per day to graze. And so, that's a big difference in production.
And even our baseline, like before we start grazing, it was very interesting to see the difference between the eco regimes, like what we have when it comes to soil organic carbon, for example. Michigan looks like we store mostly on the top layers of the soil, and then when we got the Wyoming results, most of their soil organic carbon stocks is going to be on the deeper. It's kind of like just the baseline already inform us, and so much that I think was lacking on the literature.
So is that driven, and you may not have an answer to this, but is that driven because the root system are got to be much deeper in Wyoming than they are in Michigan because of rainfall?
Yes. I think my colleagues from the soil team would have a deeper answer, but I'm pretty sure it's driven by root. I remember we collecting some samples in Wyoming, and we see the roots at the deeper level. So we collect a meter deep soil cores. So we see a lot of roots in Michigan from the 15 to 30 meters, and then we found some roots back on a meter deep in Wyoming. So I believe that's the right track. It's going to be the root system of the grasses.
I mean, for them, their systems to be resilient, they have to be resilient to drought every 3 years, every 2 years. And so the root system has to be much deeper to be resilient than in Michigan that may not get a drought every, I don't know, maybe 5, 6, 7 years, whatever.
And then when we get it's dramatic, right? But our system recovers a little faster. Yeah.
It does. Yep.
Yeah. What we see, when we try to apply this adaptive management, for example, that we are calling adaptive, what they look like in Michigan, Wyoming is completely different. Like Wyoming, they cannot use as much stock density as we do. Like we have some grazing rotations where we do like 120 cow-calf pairs in zero point 0.5 acres, and we rotate them every 6 hours. But we can do this, and then that pasture is ready for them to come back after 60 days. Like it recovers it very fast. Wyoming, they usually do one grazing a year. They are not able to return their herd again. So like I think this project outcomes is going to be really beneficial to grazing management when we get the final results of it.
Very seldomly in a year that you can regraze a pasture in the Western United States. And it's just driven off of rainfall, and most years you will not be able to come back to a pasture. So that's the challenge with grazing systems, right?
Yeah, and attached to that, the other project that I'm leading is related to remote sensing high resolution, where I use drones. They are very attached to each other, so like I fly the drone over the same pastures as the 3M project. Okay. And with that project, I collect methane emissions. Like one thing that we do not collect at the 3M project is the methane. And in Michigan, I'm fulfilling that gap with this drone project. And then my point with the project is, again, creating tools to near real-time help producers to decide where to put the cow and for how long on their own farm. So we collect resolution of 1 centimeter images, and then I do this map of the farm. And I fly like right now, because it's the beginning, I fly like every 7 days to just like create this almost digital twin where I see the pasture growth. But we are not trying just to predict biomass. There is tools out there that predicts biomass really well. Our idea is to predict quality as well. So we are working with like infrared sensors that we can get to quality, not just quantity of forage. And then a long term, like the biggest goal is to connect that to methane emissions. So I measure methane at the pastures. We know that the big driven of methane is fiber. So I'm trying to quantify fiber through the drone and then see if I can get to methane emissions with some cattle information. So that's kind of the big goal of that project. And that's the last project that I'm leading here at Michigan State.
That's cool. So, I've always wanted, because that's one of the biggest challenge for producers is, and biomass is too, right, is to estimate biomass in a pasture and knowing when to get in, when to get out. And that's a challenge, especially in extensive systems that, that pasture may be 20 miles away. And to get out there and look at that pasture can be a challenge. And I always believed that drones could be part of that. Is, there's some issues with flight time and et cetera with drones in the United States, but or flight distance and time. But I've always thought that using drones to estimate biomass, and you would also need quality, is important to that equation. It was a very important tool for a lot of producers to understand.
Yeah, we started using satellites because of the scalability of it, which is, I think, it's a very interesting information. But satellites, of course, they work, but they are hardly depend on the weather. Like if it's cloudy, if it's rainy, they don't get the image, so you lose some information back then. And then in some systems, like again, the diversity of our projects, like our satellite that we are using for the 3M project, it's a 30-meter resolution. Works really well in Wyoming because the landscape is huge, the farmers are big. We have producers in Michigan that are very small. So like this 30-meter resolution is not going to capture the changes or not going to capture the information that we need. So that's where also the idea of using a drone with high resolution came in, because it's not that satellites doesn't work, it's not going to work everywhere, and then the drone could fulfill that gap.
Yeah, and that's the challenge with satellites is the resolution's not there, or the cost to get there is not there, right?
Yes.
And so I would imagine in the next 10, 20 years, that's going to be totally different. Will drones be out and it will be all satellite?
I believe so. I think we are advancing the technology really fast. And I believe, again, the satellite is not just about the resolution. I think we're going to get there when it comes to resolution. We're going to have a really high resolution very soon. But then Michigan, for example, in the winter, we have pretty much, it's cloudy every day. So there's nothing that the satellite can do. And that's where like the drone kind of fulfill that gap. So I do see we going more, especially thinking and upscaling what we are trying to do to satellites. However, the drone is going to still be needed for a little longer.
So how are y'all working with producers that, we've talked about Wyoming, and, they may have one pasture that's, let's just say it's, 15,000 acres. How would you use a drone in that situation to get that data?
Yeah, so like I think that the drone does not need to fly the whole thing. Is it important to see how homogeneous or heterogeneous is that pasture, right? So like if we have a highly heterogeneous pasture with different soil types, soil texture, and everything else, I think it may be necessary like to use the drone with more intensity. However, those large pastures, especially those large ranches, they tend to be pretty homogeneous. And then a snapshot of that, a percentage of that's going to be enough for the prediction instead of having to cover the whole thing. But that's a challenge because, we do have the skill between farmers in Wyoming and Michigan. Is like I can fly a drone over our research farm in less than 20, 30 minutes. The drone kind of covers the whole thing. It would take me hours to do that if I was out in Wyoming.
And so, that's what some of the challenges with technology on the ground for producers, right?
Yeah. And the idea, like, again, we are hoping to, and the producers get really excited about it, it's kind of like what keeps me going, because I like to do research that I get a good feedback and I see them using it. When I show some images of the grass changing that we collect from the satellites and the drone, and like I put my cows moving in, it's just like a prototype. It's just like the research farm. They get extremely excited seeing like, oh my gosh, like you can actually capture that through the satellite. Like how helpful that's going to be for me. So like I think they're very excited about this tool that we are trying to create.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things, especially on the beef side, and you worked on the dairy side, and that dairy side gets so much more data and have so much more ability to get data than we do on the beef side, that we're lacking a lot of the ability to make decisions because we do not have the ability to capture the data that we need. And that's where some of this technology, I think that's why they're getting excited, is they're seeing this, change so rapidly, but get data that for their entire lifespan of their ranch that they've never been able to get.
Absolutely. One of the major gaps on the beef, it's intake, right? It's hard to collect intake on the pasture. It's hard. It's a challenge that we are facing because I'm collecting methane, but not intake.
Yeah.
But we have this professor that he's trying like with another technologies, like a GPS collar and like the drone image, like we are combining a lot of technologies to see if we can get to intake, because that would be huge if we can get a good prediction of intake using technology, because again, it's a challenge to have intake when you're out in the pasture.
It's been a challenge for over 30 years. And it's sad to say we had better technology in the 1980s than we do today to get intake. And so, that's the missing black box for grazing researches. We have no ability to get intake. And so some of these technologies that you're coupling together, there's been a lot of research on like acoustics and bite size, and they'll monitor, that kind of stuff. But I think some of these technologies that you're grouping together will could get a better estimate of intake going forward.
I appreciate that, and that's what we're working on, and we're happy to deliver.
No, that would be tremendous, as the field of nutrition has been lacking for a long time. And there's all these selections saying efficiency, whatever, but we don't know that on the grazing side. And we don't know, the benefits or the negatives of what they're doing from genetic selection. And it could not be an efficient animal when we're at the end of the day in our grazing systems.
And there is a lot of talk about regenerative grazing, regenerative agriculture, or holistic management. But another thing that we are trying to shift is there's a lot of opinions, and I'm not saying that they are not based on knowledge, but there's very little science on. And why there's very little science is because it's hard to measure, because you change all the time. So again, my background was on dairy, and I controlled everything. everything. Like I was able to control everything. So I had a hypothesis and I was able to answer that because I controlled everything. And when it comes to grazing, especially when you try to apply this like more holistic management, it changes all the time. It changes based on the weather, based on forage availability. It's like you lose control and then it gets scary. So like we're trying to shift and doing those kind of research, which is challenging, but to have some data so we can actually have opinions and based on data, and not that the knowledge is not important, but like to fill that gap that I also think that's on the literature now, that there's a lot of talking about what's regenerative and how to do that, but there is still need for more science to help us understand that.
Yeah, and the challenge is there's a human aspect that's never added to that, and the human aspect actually at the end of the day probably drives the ability of anything of that to work, because you can select one or the other and you can call it whatever you want, but the human aspect of controlling that will dictate how well that works. And so that's hard from a science standpoint. And I think you guys looking at the social aspect is very important, because it's very hard for animal scientists to get that data and actually to view that from a social aspect.
Yeah, we have a whole team working on that, and it's been very enlightening for us, like, because it doesn't matter like if we have the research hubs and where we have a bunch of researchers doing what they know what to do, but if the producers are doing because of other factors, like what's the factor that are driving the decision? So like the social science team and the social aspect, that's going to be very important.
Well, Joe, to wrap us up, do you have anything that you want to touch on as we're wrapping up this conversation?
No, I think we touched on everything. My goal was to talk about the center and the projects that we have, and I think we achieved that. So I'm very happy. Thank you for the questions.
It's time for our famous three.
Boehringer Ingelheim puts cattle first. They deliver cutting-edge vaccines, parasiticides, and supplements to help keep cattle healthy and productive. From supporting fresh cows with bovical calcium boluses to protecting your herd with pyramid vaccines, Boehringer stands with veterinarians and producers every step of the way. Put cattle first on your operation. Learn more at bianimalhealth.com/cattle.
Yeah, so I've got three last questions, and so the first question is, what is your go-to highly recommended beef resource? Could be book, could be website.
I would say again, the network, the Landscape Intelligence Network, it's at the beginning. Like we are launching a website very soon, but there is years and years of data. Like there is over 15 years of data coming from Lake City that's going to feed that website. So I would highly recommend that. And I'm going to try to share later with your team the link. The MSU extension team, the beef and the grazing team are awesome too, with a lot of information. So I recommend those two.
That's great. So what is a non-ag book do you recommend someone reading?
Yeah, I just finished reading a book that the translation to English would be Blindness. It's from a Portuguese author, and that it's like how society would perform if nobody was watching us. So like it's a really interesting book that there's this disease or this virus that we get blind little by little, like not the whole population blind at the same time, but like it's gonna like pass through people to people. And then we're gonna see through the book how the ones that still see, how they act throughout the one that doesn't see. And then when we're all blind, how as a society we deal with that. And the main point is like, we always think that we are going to be good, but once nobody's watching us, you may be surprised on how we behave. So it's a very interesting book to read.
True colors of people come out.
Yes, absolutely.
Sounds interesting. So lastly, what sets apart a successful beef professional from someone that isn't?
In my opinion, especially after I start working here at Michigan State, it's someone that would understand a little bit of everything, like seeing the system as a whole. It is important to dig deep in some areas, but not just focus on productivity or sustainability or environment, but someone that's able to see the whole system and help decision making, because one decision is going to affect multiple factors. And then if you just focus on one thing, you can fail. So I think a successful person is that person that has the ability to step out and see the system as a whole thing.
No, it's great because so many times we get stuck, especially in academia, we get stuck in our field of interest, and whether or not it's we want to increase reproduction, and there's always downstream effects of that, and there's cost to that, and a lot of times we don't look at it from the system aspect of the system that the producers actually work in. And I think it's so important to sit back and detach from our area and look at stuff from a system rather than from a singular focused area.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's great. Well, JP, thank you for jumping on the podcast. Really interesting stuff. Looking forward to seeing what comes from your landscape intelligence network and seeing what you guys do.
Yeah, thank you so much, Travis. It was a pleasure.